Ladies, gentlemen, good afternoon. This is Germinal Van. Today I would like to talk to you about a topic or a subject that I do my scientific work in. And this subject is public choice theory. Some of you have heard about public choice theory. Most of you don't know what public choice theory is, and that's fine because it doesn't have a set definition. So it's not something that if we say at first hand someone will immediately pick what it is. Unless you've done some research about that, you cannot really know nor understand what public choice theory is. So that's what I want to do in this video. I wanted to explain to you guys the definition, the theory, and the application of public choice theory. So public choice theory is the use of economic thinking in political science. So basically, for those who major in political science, if you are a proponent of public choice theory, you will see political science, political activity, and political behavior from an economic standpoint. That's what public choice theory is. But even that definition is still broad. I'm going to go deeper so that you will have a better understanding of what the whole concept is about. Public choice theory is a subset of positive political theory. Positive political theory deals with what is instead of what ought to be. What we learn mostly in political philosophy deals with what ought to be. So all the books in political philosophy that we read, John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, Rousseau, Machiavelli, etc. All these guys deal with what ought to be, what has to be. But positive political theory deals with what is. There is a situation, there is a political situation, there is a political event. We deal with what things are the way they are. And maybe based on that, we can maybe make recommendations to say what things should be. But mainly, public choice theory deals with the current political event that we're in. It is interesting because public choice theory also is used a lot in economics too. Because public choice theory takes into account the political process. It is in fact, I would say also a branch or a subject of political economy. Public choice theory was created and developed by two scholars, James McGill Buchanan and Gordon Tullock. They developed that in the late 1950s, early 1960s. In 1962, they produced a book, a path-breaking book that completely launched the field of public choice theory as a cross-disciplinary study. That book is entitled The Calculus of Consent. Basically, that book explains how the limited powers of government can in fact establish the principles of a free society. But it was written in a very analytical way. There's even some mathematics in it, so it demands like a lot of intellectual concentration to completely understand what this book talks about, because it's not necessarily an easy read, but it is fascinating once you understand the basic concepts. So public choice theory, in fact, makes a robust analysis against government. That's what it's about. It advocates for the limited powers of government. It advocates for the constitutional scope of a free society. And on top of that, it advocates for individual rights. But they all advocate for these elements I just mentioned from an economic standpoint. James Buchanan and Gordon Tullock say that, hey, politicians are no different than the entrepreneur. People say the entrepreneur is selfish, the entrepreneur thinks about profit, but the politician is in no way different. When the guy is elected, all he cares about is to maintain himself in power. At least the difference between the entrepreneur and the politician is that the entrepreneur uses his own resources to pursue his agenda, while the politician uses the resources of the people, which means taxes. Because do not forget that the state does not have money on its own. The state makes its money through taxation. It makes its money through borrowing from the central bank. Therefore, the salary of politicians is based on your taxes. Politicians don't create jobs. Most politicians, at least, don't create jobs. And career politicians build their wealth in the public sector. And they always rely on the votes of people to maintain themselves in power and pursue their own agenda. And that's what James Buchanan and Gordon Tullock talk about in the calculus of consent. Now, let me go deeper into the concept of public choice theory. In fact, there are two theorems that define public choice. You have the first theorem, which is rent seeking, and the second theorem, which is Logrolling. Let me start with rent seeking. Rent seeking is a philosophical concept that was developed by Gordon Tullock. Gordon Tullock said that rent seeking is basically people who use the political process to inflate their own wealth without creating new wealth for the whole society. The entrepreneur, when he starts his business, he takes all the risk, and there is no guarantee that he will get a return on his investment. He takes the savings, that the money that he saved for 2, 3, 4, 5, sometimes 6 years, and start a business, and there's no guarantee that that business will actually be a success. On the other hand, career politician, let me take two examples, Joe Biden and Mitch McConnell. Two politicians who were lawyers. They never really work in the private sector. Those are the guys that they got a law degree, they became prosecutors or public defender, and then they build their wealth in the political process. Both of these guys have been in power. They have been senators and federal politicians for over 3 decades. Today, Mitch McConnell and Joe Biden are both millionaires. When they started, they were not millionaires. How did they make that money? Where that money comes from? Joe Biden and Mitch McConnell never created jobs. Those who may work for Joe Biden or for Mitch McConnell are paid by the state. They're paid by the US government. Joe Biden doesn't take money out of his pocket to pay those people. They're all paid by the political process. While the entrepreneur has to take his money to pay his own employees, especially when the business is still at the first phase. So when the entrepreneur is successful, what the success of his business in fact creates wealth for the entire community. While for the politician, when the politician is successful, the wealth he creates is for himself. He becomes richer and richer, but he doesn't create wealth for the rest of the people. And that's what rent seeking is about, is to take advantage of a system without you contributing in that system. You take advantage and opportunities of what the system offers you, and you don't bring anything back to it. That's what rent seeking is. The second is log rolling. Log rolling simply is when politicians do favors to each other. When they vote bills, when they pass bills, they say, okay, I will vote for your bill if you vote for my bill the next time I come before Congress and propose it. That's what log rolling is. They do not implement policies for the sake or the well-being of the community. They implement policies for the sake of a special interest group. So public choice theory in fact denounces these two concepts. Now, what are the elements of public choice theory? Or should I say the tools that we use in public choice theory? We use game theory. Game theory, of course, is the mathematics of decision making, because public choice theory deals a lot with political behavior, It deals a lot with political psychology, how politicians make their decisions, why they make their decisions, and what is the end game of the decision they make. So we use game theory to actually analyze the impact of their decision. We also use statistics because statistics specifically deals with the impact of the policies they implement. How the how one policy affects one group of people over another group of people. That's what uh, that's what public choice theory deals with. That are the tools that we use in public choice theory. So it's very raw, it's very empirical, it's very analytical. It is not some philosophy that we talk about and philosophers about like how things should be, how and everything will be fine. No, it takes things for what they are and explain to you how things are and maybe how we can make them better. So now that we have assessed completely public choice theory, now we're going to talk about the application of public choice theory. How public choice theory is applied, or on what context it is applied. Public Public choice theory, in fact, is applied for constitutional changes. In fact, public choice theory is even a sub-branch of constitutional economics. It is a field in political economy and economics that has been developed by James Buchanan. So how do we apply public choice theory? So as I said, it's through constitutional amendments. Let's say, for instance, we want to make some changes regarding term limits. This is in fact something that the political process is strongly against, because for all the people who are career politicians, that is a huge issue for them, because that's how they created the wealth. So one way to prevent rent seeking is to abolish the path of career politicians. So we can implement a constitutional change, an amendment that says that, okay, if you want to run for office, you need to be 60 years of age and you need to have a certain level of education. That's one way. The other way also to understand and to analyze political science or politics through the use of public choice theory is to see the impact of policies on people, as I said earlier. How, for instance, let's say the welfare state has affected Asians compared to African Americans. Then, yes, you can use statistical tools to actually determine the impact of policies. So these are the applications of public choice theory. We try to analyze in depth how policies impact people, how they impact group of people, and specifically the culture. Additionally to that, now I'm going to give you a little bit of history about public choice theory. So as I said earlier, it was developed by James Buchanan and Gordon Tullock in the late 50s, early 60s. And it started at the University of Chicago. And James Buchanan and Gordon Tullock then moved to Virginia, and they taught at many universities, including George Mason, Virginia Tech, and they became academic entrepreneurs. So the field of study that they created, they wanted to promote it. They wanted to make a concrete, an intellectual substance. So they created a journal called Public Choice for people who love political economy. They can publish with Public Choice Journal. They create that journal, and they create a school also called the Virginia School of Political Economy. So now the Virginia School of Political Economy, I believe it is established. I know it was established in Blacksburg, but I don't know if they moved that to George Mason, because Buchanan taught at George Mason. But it specifically emphasizes on political economy. It focuses on the relationship between political decisions and economic outcomes. How political decisions affect economic relationships. how political decisions affect economic activity. It basically emphasized on the limits of government. It emphasized on government failures, all these policies that they implement and it fails. One thing to understand also about public choice theory is that it is it seeks to make people understand the differentiation between the mindset of the bureaucrat and the mindset of the entrepreneur. The entrepreneur thinks in terms of profit. He has a business. He uses his own resources to ensure that that business is a success and is profitable. That's how this business can survive. The politician thinks in terms of the expansion of political power for himself. That being said, when a law is implemented, they say the market failed, we need to implement rules and regulations to prevent market failures. By doing so, the policies or the programs that they implement are never entirely successful. Why? Because if they're successful, the role of the political process over the regulation of the market starts to restrain. So to implement more rules and regulation, the policy they implement has to fail. Because if it fails, they say, oh, we didn't have enough resources. Since we didn't have enough resources, we're going to pass new laws that will enable us to have more resources so that we can run this program correctly. So they create a new program over the program that failed and attempt to do CPR on that failed program. That's what that's one of the things that public choice argues against. Government failures. How government does not do better than the private sector. Because we tend to rely on the government to say, oh, the market failed, we're going to call the government to fix the problem. But those who implement the laws to regulate the market do not implement those same laws on themselves. They implement laws that constrain the freedom of those who own the means of production to actually produce. But they do not implement those same laws on themselves, so they do not constrain their own actions. And that is something that public choice theory decries. It says that it is completely unjust. In fact, it is political corruption. Because by doing so, all they do is to inflate the power of the state apparatus. They only inflate the power of the government. They implement laws, they do not implement those laws on themselves, which give them unlimited power, unlimited access over how things should be produced. How it gives them also power over how things should be allocated. It comes back to the concept of central planning in the Soviet Union and how trying to use linear programming to determine the allocation of resources, in fact, just create a more coercive approach to control resources. So James Buchanan argued that the real mathematics of public choice theory, in fact, is game theory, because game theory enables competition. It gives people the choice to make decisions for themselves on what is good for themselves, while linear programming focuses on how one central authority decides on how things should be allocated and how things should be produced. So overall, that's what public choice theory is. It advocates for for the scope of the Constitution to remain to its original intent. It advocates for the limitation of the coercive power of government over the citizenry. It advocates for the freedom of the market. It advocates for against logrolling. It advocates against rent seeking. It basically advocates for the individual rights of people. It advocates for people to be free to make their own choices in a free society. Public choice, I know it's kind of confusing for some, but the books that I will recommend you to read to clearly understand public choice theory is The Calculus of Consent, Government Failure, a primer, Wealth, Poverty and Politics, also by Thomas Sowell and Gordon Tullock. They both wrote a book, not together but on the same subject. Book by Gordon Tullock called The Rent-Seeking Society. Another book by Gordon Tullock called The Bureaucracy, and another book by Gordon Tullock that I read. It's called The Economics and Politics of Wealth Redistribution. So these are some of the books that you guys can read to actually get a hand on what public trust theory is. But it is a solid concept to analyze government failures. It is a solid concept to promote the free market, especially from an empirical standpoint. That's why I highly rely on public trust theory to make my arguments in my books and even in my papers. So I really hope that you guys enjoyed this video, and I see you guys next